This is TWiT.
Now, you promised us something last week.
I did, and I still haven't opened it. And it's got a crazy top on it.
Oh, it's the leather top.
The leather top, yeah. And we're gonna have to cut the stitches off of this to figure this out. And you're gonna find out how much I like
bottle.
It. Yeah. So it's a first for me. I've never seen anything quite like this. But I also realized as I was digging into this, this is the first time talking about whiskey from South Africa. In fact, the first African whiskey I've talked about at all. And so we always kind of, when I did the Canadian, I talked a bit about the history of whiskey in Canada, same for Japanese and so forth. So I felt I had to do the same treatment. It was only fair, which just means a little more writing and a little more storytelling. Because I want to start with the terroir. I think the terroir is important and definitely one of the reasons why it's pretty challenging to make whiskey in a place like South Africa. First time we've talked about Africa at all. So, I mean, right off the bat, hey, we talk about Neolithic peoples and things in northern England. This is the cradle of civilization here. We've got evidence of Homo sapiens in and around South Africa for something like 100,000 years. And so many different migration events and different peoples arriving. The early people, when they talk about South Africa, are the Khoisan, where are the earliest peoples, although the Bantu, which are more contemporary, show up around 300 AD, and they also come with agriculture and a lot of practices that you would recognize there, along with things like sorghum, which came out of Central Africa and was brought down and grew just fine in South Africa as well. Of course, eventually the Europeans show up, and it was the Portuguese who got there first around the 14th century. The Dutch East India Company set up a settlement in the Western Cape in 1652, which made the British annoyed. So the British fought back and they gained control in that area in 1795, leading to a series of conflicts that culminate in the Anglo-Boer War of 1899 to 1902. The fallout of that ultimately results in what's known as the Union of South Africa, combining the four major states of South Africa, the Cape, Natal, Transvaal, and the Orange Free State. Now we get into more contemporary stuff post-World War II, when Afrikaner nationalism sort of leads to apartheid, which we all are familiar with from the 80s and the 90s. The African National Congress had been around a long time, all the way back to 1912, where they were always focused on the fact that Black South Africans were excluded from political power. This turned violent on occasion, and in fact, one of those occasions resulted in the arrest of Nelson Mandela in 1962. Who was then held in various prisons until 1990 when de Klerk released him and began the end of apartheid and ultimately leading to the multiracial elections of 1994. Mandela winning, of course, writing a new constitution, and we get to the current history, which, of course, has not been that simple either. It's been 30 years, and they're having all of their own struggles. Environmentally, the ecology, this is a subtropical part of the world. It stretches from the most northern parts of South Africa are about 22 degrees north. Remember that the Tropic of Capricorn is at 23.4. The Tropic of Capricorn being the line that is the southernmost angle of the sun when it's directly overhead on the December solstice. That's what measures the tropics, and anything above that tropic is considered tropical and below it subtropical, and so forth down the line. So what this results in is a chunk of land spanning from about 22 to 35. And so in the Southwest, you have what we would consider a Mediterranean climate and more subtropical up at the Northeast. You do have quite temperate conditions inland, mostly because they're at altitude, well over 1,500 meters in many spots along the Drakensbergs and the like. It's about a population of 63 million people. The original crop in that area, of course, was sorghum, which came a couple of thousand years ago, although wheat did eventually make its way down there. Remember, wheat was growing just fine in northern Africa in 5000 BC. That was part of what made the Egyptian Empire so massive. But getting across the equator is pretty difficult, so we don't really see wheat until the Dutch bring it in 1652. Corn was brought by the Portuguese explorers from the Americas in 1655, and barley also grown there, but not near as much. The area where I was spending most of my time in the Western Cape and around Cape Town is the big agricultural center. There's about 2.5 million farming households, although 2 million of those are subsistence farmers. So farmers that where the vast majority of their food is purely for feeding the family. Not that many. The proportion of commercial farming to subsistence farming is different. This is one of the measures we use when we talk about a developing nation is how much subsistence farming there still is. And if there is farming, and there has been for thousands of years, there is alcohol. And there are plenty of domestic alcohols in South Africa. One of the originals would be Umbakwathi, which is originally a sorghum-based beer, although quickly switched over to maize as it became more prevalent. Today, you can buy commercial versions of this, which are primarily a corn-based beer, maize beer. More in the European stuff, the Whitblitz is a kind of brandy. Again, the big wine growing region in the Cape area. And so you have leftovers for making wine. You're going to make brandy. And so then plenty of that. Mampower is another kind of brandy made from other fruits like peach and apricot, more in the north. And then most people know of a drink, if you know anything about African drink, especially South African, is amarula, which is sort of a play on a Bailey's. It's a creamy liqueur kind of chocolate, but it's made with the marula fruit. The marula fruit famously ferments on the tree, and there are great videos of elephants absolutely hammered, having chewed up the overripe amarula. So, and if you ever see a bottle of amarula, you'll see a big picture of an elephant on it, because apparently it's the thing the elephants like to get drunk on. Now, actually tracing the history of whiskey in South Africa is a little trickier, just because lots of people like to claim that they started it, and many of it is not true. So again, where do you see whiskey distilleries appear? On grain farms. And so even in those temperate regions where grains grew fairly well, so this is the area around Pretoria, there was a fellow named Alois Hugo Nabapus who built a distillery in his area. And the only reason we know about this one, because he eventually got caught and had to get a license. And in 1881, he got his license from the Transvaal government. This is before South Africa was South Africa. And he had the rights to distill liquor from corn and other sources. That distillery is called Eerst Cabreken, and it opened in 1883. Apparently, the product was not great, but the miners didn't care. They just wanted cheap booze. Although he eventually hired a cognac maker, a guy named Rene Sanhathigans, who came down and started improving the distillation processes, which was all well and fine until the Anglo-Boer War of 1899, which essentially shut down booze production for the most part in South Africa. Sanhathigans actually fled back to France, although he did come back after the war was over in 1903, and he was able to buy the stills from the Cabreken distillery at a bankruptcy auction. And then took those stills, moved to Stellenbosch, which is where one of the big wine growing regions in the Western Cape, bought a farm, and to this day they still make a brandy there called Santis Premier. Now, on the other side, so that's up in Pretoria. Back over in the Cape area, where there's lots of going on, there was another distillery built by Donald Robertson and Noel Buxton. This is in the 1960s, so much more current. They call it because it was Robertson and Buxton, they called it the R&B Distillery. They weren't having a lot of success either after spending 10 or so years on it, and the Stellenbosch Farmers Winery bought it up to experiment with different alcohols. They eventually started making a version of whiskey called the Three Ships. This is a very well-known whiskey, although the original product was primarily Scottish whiskey, and then they added a little bit of their own spirit to it. That was the Three Ships, because it was actually imported whiskey combining Scottish malt and their own spirit. But jump back, because if you generally look at where the first distilleries in South Africa, you talk about the quote unquote first distillery in Africa. I don't think any of this is true, but it's, the documentation you'll find that James Sedgwick, his sons opened a distillery in 1886. And then Sedgwick was a captain who worked for the British East Indies companies. He was well known for his tea clipper. He was famously one of the first to get the new season tea to the England in the clipper Undine. When he retired in Cape Town and opened an importing business for liquor and tobacco, his sons took it over in 1872, and they bought the buildings that made their distillery. It was likely already a brandy distillery. Again, all of this is sort of muddied. And they are quick to claim they were the only commercial distillery in Africa. But, you can't actually find any evidence of any bottles that they made at that time. We don't really hear about the James Sedgwick distillery making whiskey until they actually move the production of Three Ships from R&B over to them. and grow the production out. They also make another well-known South African whiskey called Baines, which is actually a grain whiskey. It's made from corn, so more like a bourbon. I tried both of these while I was down there. I would call them mixer whiskeys, like they're pretty basic. And that leads us to this one. But I wanted to be complete. Can't talk about whiskey in South Africa. We're talking about Three Ships and Baines, both owned by the Sedgwick Distillery. But this is Drayman's, and this is a contemporary whiskey production. So this was made by a guy named Moritz Kallmeyer, who is a beer maker. So he started out in the 90s, and a Drayman, of course, is someone who transports and delivers beer. And he started in the 90s making beer out of Pretoria region as well. Pretty common thing to do. And again, they're like 5,000 feet, 1,600 meters in Pretoria. So high altitude, it creates a temperate environment, even though they are pretty far close to the equator. And his products are very successful. They make their money off of beer. They make a series of different craft beers that people really like. One of the most popular is called Jolly Monk, which use smoked malt. They've always used two-row barley, which is very whiskey friendly. And Drayman's also got into the winery business. So they make wine as well. And they age all their wine in Bordeaux casks that they buy from France, although they age their own wine in them from new. And that combination of being a brewer and a winemaker, in 2006, it makes sense to start making whiskey because he already knows how to get good barley. He does it for his wine and for his beer, and he buys barley malt grown in Swartland, not far from Pretoria, to classic two-row barley. Although he does admit that he also imports peated malt from Scotland.
Oh wow!
Wooden mash tuns. He only does a 2 mash run when most places do 3. Stainless steel washbacks, pretty classic stuff. He uses his own unique blend of yeasts, primarily brewer's yeast, because that's what he's got. It is a brewery after all. And that means he has a very long ferment to try and get the alcohol levels up, because brewery's yeast tends to die young at a lower alcohol level than distiller's yeast. Distiller's yeast is a bit more robust, and you can get to 8, 9, 10% before it starts to die off. Typically, they're done. Brewer's yeast is done around 7%. And then he only has a single still. So he does a double pot distillation, but he does it in the same still. So not a huge, fast production run, not a lot of capacity. But then he takes these Bordeaux casks that have already had his wine in them, does a bit of toasting on them. They're relatively small, about 225 liters. Typical would be 250, and does his aging there. And I haven't got a lot of details on their aging process, but I have seen photos of the barrels sitting horizontally in racks 3 high in what looked like very much a steel shed. So now we get into the challenge of, is it too hot? Is it too cold? Like, how's the temperature management there? Because getting it aged well is tough. I did read a good piece from about Drayman's on their barrel reprocessing, that after they run a batch through, then they shave the interior of the barrel and retoast it. And that reminded me of the Taiwanese whiskey, the Calavan whiskey, which also went through this particular shave and retoasting process. And they're also at about 33 degrees north as opposed to 33 degrees south. So they're dealing with a similar climate environment. So you've got all the steps here. And I would point out this is a 5-year-old, but it's got a lot of color in it. And that's probably because it's been aged in a red wine cask.
It's got more color than actually the website shows.
Yeah. And that might be a lighting thing here. It's just, not as bright here.
So it looks like wine. It looks red.
I clipped the back of the leather off to open it up. And it looks like we have a screw top instead of
that's disappointing.
That's probably, you don't really need a cork top on it. It says right on the edge of this label. The label is the sole property of Drayman's Distillery. So is that a proof that this is the original seal still on this? Interesting. All right. And it opens just fine. So I'm not too anxious about them using a cork push top versus a screw top. It actually will ship better with a screw top because it takes more pressure.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Right.
A lot of wineries are using screw tops now.
Yeah.
It's hard to get.
Just got a lot of alcohol in the room, just like that. This is only 43%. I got a boozy nose on it. So nothing wrong with that. Just that's a freshly opened bottle, and 2 ways about it. Wow. All right. Not a lot of upfront burn. Got a little tingle on the lips, like, hello, we're here. Lots of different fruits, like a raisin, apricot, And some heat going down. Really nice. Wow. That's impressive for a 5-year-old.
It's the only single malt whiskey out of South Africa.
Yeah, they
right?
say it is, but I think what they've got is a lack of regulation down there because every one of the different distilleries I found made claims that would normally get them in trouble in any other place.
Right.
So, wow. Okay, second drink is a little more potent. Now I'm getting flush. Like it was really
Actually,
quite sturdy.
You're turning as dark as that whiskey.
God, no kidding.
Wow.
Only a 43%. This is nice. You would not buy a 5-year-old Scottish whiskey. And in fact, no Scottish whiskey maker would allow a 5 to be on the label. It just wouldn't have enough. It would have no age declaration on it. And I defy you to think this is only a 5. It drinks really well. Now, admittedly, it's much more extreme there. So aging's going to happen faster. I mean, there'd be a battle here with the temperatures as to whether they'd be losing water versus alcohol on those barrels. But I also know Bordeaux barrels tend to be thicker than bourbon barrels anyway. So they're actually better at holding on to their alcohol and at holding on to their liquids in general than the bourbon casks do. And I think we talked about this last week where most whiskey you drink these days is spent time in bourbon barrels because they're just so plentiful and inexpensive. This hasn't. This has only been aged in French oak. That's kind of special. The same way that the Macallan sherry casks are only aged in sherry barrels. So what you got here is a remarkably original yet old school style of whiskey coming out of a really small producer outside of Pretoria. And that's pretty cool. My friend William gave me this bottle as I was finishing my 2 weeks in South Africa. And he was part of the reason that I had such a good time there. And William knocked it out of the park. Like, what a great find. We went to a whiskey bar and tried a little of the Baines and a little Three Sails and, talked about those. There was no Draymans for sale because they just don't produce that much. But then he got me one of these bottles and I did not open it until you watched me open it right now. And it's a score. And at 500 South African Rand, that's about $30 US.
Wow.
If you could find one.
Yeah, that's the trick.
And I don't know, they don't produce enough to really be shipping anywhere. So if you're down there, I would grab one. And there's a question here about whether the barrels are reused. Yes, the barrels are reused. They shave and retoast them between utilizations, which is one of the things they can do with older, larger.
Their webpage actually has the most complete description of how they make it I've ever seen on any webpage for a whiskey.
While also leaving out some important details, like getting the specs on the still. Then not a lot of information there.
Yeah.
Even just figuring out that they only have one still. And so they're not doing low wines, fine wines. But that, again, you talk about lack of regulation. Why do the Scots use 2 stills? Because they have to use the still safe to control the flow of the alcohol so it doesn't get stolen. It's all about taxation. That's the South African rules don't have any of those requirements.
And it makes a pretty good whiskey.
Dude, this is a legit single malt.
Nice
Absolutely.
job,
Service
Moritz.
to your friends.
Wow.
And at $30 a bottle, keep it around.
Drayman's.
You're wrong. Problem is you're going to have to make a trip to South Africa to get it. That's the only problem.
Is it a long flight?
It's worth it for the leather top. I think.
Yeah, but if you're down there, come home with one. And if anybody's coming up there from there, tell them to bring one.
Drayman's Highveld single malt whiskey.
Yep.
And you can spread it out over 3 months if you can't afford the $30, which is good. It's good.
I would say it sounds like somebody's got it. Some Total Wine has it. Somebody's found it.
Really?
Which is great. Yeah, if you can find it.
It's $100 a Total Wine. Thank you, Snoop Mikey.
It's about nice. That's about right.
I don't get that.
Yeah, because you're already going to end up with a Baines or a Three Sails. And like I said, I think there are more mixer whiskeys. I did try some older editions, and you struggle to make an older bottle of whiskey in a place like that.
Yeah, I think the $100 is because it's so unusual and rare.
Yeah. You can charge what you want.
But it looks like I can go down to Culver City and pick one up on aisle 13 left.
There you go.
Bay 3. So it's waiting for you.
Figure 100% import charge for sure. So now it's at $60 and then they mark it up, which typically is about 100%. So somewhere in the $100 mark seems reasonable.
Yeah, not bad at all.
Yep.
Richard, thank you for a really good whiskey and for a really good show. You too, Paul. I guess you helped.
We did some stuff. Here as I can tell, this show is actually about whatever Paul wrote this week and me making fun of it, but I'm okay with that.
That's that. You're the color man. He's the play-by-play. That's all.
I mean, we would just do this on the phone for free. So it's
not that different than our regular conversations, really. No.